parent, you know that there comes a moment when you realize your kid is watching you. The ability to mimic is actually a developmental skill that we acquire pretty early in life. And at first, it's cute, right? When your kid is sticking out their tongue in response to you sticking out your tongue, when they're clapping because you're clapping, when they're finally able to make that sound that you have been making. But then, inevitably, there's a moment when it goes too far. For me, too far was about a month ago. Caroline was toddling around the house one morning, dragging this bag behind her, when all of a sudden, it's like a switch flipped, and she went into high-speed motion. She hoisted the bag on her shoulder, she ran across the room, picked up her toy cell phone, then moved and picked up a baby doll in the crook of her arm, looked at David and I, and said, "Bye-bye." I was horrified. And David was rolling. "She's you," he said. And he was right. Every morning, I have my computer bag on my shoulder, I have my cell phone in my hand, I have Caroline in the other arm, and I am rushing out the door saying bye as I go. We learn how to be human. We learn how to be adults, how to behave by watching other people. We act out what we see. And if my phone is always in my hand, then Caroline is going to think that addiction and attachment to technology is part of what it means to be an adult. If I am always rushing out the door, then Caroline's going to think that the hurried life is the norm. But of the same token, if we sit down at the table to eat dinner and we turn off the television, then Caroline is going to learn the art of conversation. If she sees me engaging with our neighbors and loving our neighbors well, then she's going to believe that all people are deserving of kindness and respect. Imitation is an inevitable part of how we learn. Yet when I read Paul saying to the Philippian church, "Imitate me," I get a little uncomfortable. It feels a little bit like an ego trip. Like Paul thinks that he's the best disciple, and therefore he should be the one that they imitate. But that's not what Paul's getting at all, really, if you do a little bit of digging. Imitation, mimicking a teacher, was actually a really common learning technique in the ancient world. Students would mimic their teachers' lives as a way of internalizing their lessons. And so in the world of the early church, in the world where there is no precedent for what it means to be a follower of Jesus, there is no church history, there is actually no New Testament as of yet, the early Christians had to mimic the lives of their leaders to learn what it meant to be a Christian. In the same way that Caroline learns to be human and learns what it means to be an adult by watching me, the early Christians learned what it meant to be a Jesus follower by watching more experienced Jesus followers. Paul ends up in that same verse not just encouraging the Philippian church to watch him, but to watch others who have watched him. The wording is, "Observe those who live according to the example you have in us." The word that is used for example there is actually the Greek word typos. And typos really means to leave an imprint, like a mark or a seal. So Paul presents his own life as the life that is going to leave an imprint on his fellow followers of Jesus. But really, it's not Paul that is the archetype. Paul is imitating Jesus, and the church is imitating Paul. And so it's really like these little imprints of Jesus are getting passed down. The goal is not, the hope is not for the Philippian church to look more and more like Paul. The hope is for the Philippian church to look more and more like Jesus. The goal is not for the imprint that is left on the church to be the face of Paul, but the goal is for the imprint left on the church to be in the shape of a cross. The reality is that we are always imitating someone. and we are always being imitated. And so my question to you is, who or what are you imitating? Are you imitating the right people and things? Is your life taking the shape of a cross, or is it taking the shape of something else entirely? When others imitate you, are they closer to the heart of God, or are they further away? When others follow your lead, do you pass down the traits of Jesus Christ? The strange thing is that when people imitate the same thing, no matter what it is that they're imitating, they begin to form a community. They begin to kind of come together over what it is that they are imitating, no matter what it is that they're imitating. On Tuesday, David and I toured Warner Brothers Studios in London, and that's where they filmed Harry Potter. And as we were walking in, I saw all of these adults dressed as wizards. And I have to tell you that it never once occurred to me to dress as a wizard as an adult. But then I watched two of them talking to each other, and I realized that they were in a club that I wasn't in. I graduated from Texas A&M University, and as a student, I spent almost every Saturday in the fall standing through an entire football game as part of the 12th man. You see, Aggie students imitate the original 12th man, E. King Gill, and in doing so, form the Aggie family. Who or what you imitate creates your community. Hopefully, we are the community that imitates Jesus. And when that is true, we become the commonwealth of heaven. We form a community that looks otherworldly, that looks unlike anything on this earth. When you look in verse 20 of chapter 3 of Philippians, the word citizenship that's used there tells us that we belong, that there's some ownership as part of being in the citizenship of heaven, the commonwealth of heaven. And as with anything that you belong to, there are some rights and privileges to belonging. There are rights and privileges associated with having your citizenship in heaven that we have to exercise. Because if you don't exercise them, it would be like being a U.S. citizen and not voting, or like having a passport and never using it. But I want to warn you, the rights and privileges of the citizenship of heaven are perhaps not the kinds of things that you would expect. Because as much as this community is an otherworldly community, it has a lot of earthly implications. The rights and privileges of having citizenship in heaven include work, humility, and hospitality. You get to work. You get to be deeply invested in the here and now, in the present needs of this world, in the suffering and the pain of those around you. You see, citizenship in heaven is not an invitation to sit on your laurels and thank God that you have been saved and ignore everyone else. It's not an invitation to dream only of what is to come, to keep your head in the clouds, to ignore what's going on around you. Citizenship in heaven does not mean enjoying goodness, but keeping it only for yourself. Having citizenship in heaven, letting our community become the commonwealth of heaven, is an invitation to work, to bring heaven to earth. If our community does in fact form the commonwealth of heaven, and I pray that we do, then our goal is to leave traces of heaven everywhere we go on earth. As I look at the missions of First Methodist Houston, I am convinced that everything that we do is aimed at bringing a little bit of heaven to earth. During Hurricane Harvey, we didn't turn in on ourselves and just thank God that our churches didn't flood. We looked into our neighborhoods and we began to consider what it is that God was calling us to do in response. We got to work. Take a look.
tuvimos que salir de esa casa porque muchas veces se me llenó de agua. Mi hijo, antes de movernos, después del huracán, dijo, no mamá, ¿cuándo Dios te va a escuchar y vamos a tener una casa? Nos agarramos las manos, los cuatro, y oramos. Y fue así que le dije, Dios ya nos contestó, hijo, solo tengamos fe y no dudar que Dios existe. El carro se me había arruinado, también porque se había inundado. Y no tenía carro, no tenía cómo moverme ni trabajar, todo estaba parado. Entonces, pero Dios tuvo misericordia de mí. Fueron 4 personas de la iglesia.
We met Alba at her house to see what we could do to repair her home, but when we got there, we realized that the home was not repairable.
It needed so much more than just drywall, because she only had, in her house, she only had 1 bedroom. She had a tiny kitchen.
A little more than a bulb in the middle of the room and mattresses on the floor. The shed was leaning about 10 to 15 degrees, and she wanted us to fix it and make it better, but simply we couldn't do it. It was a liability issue and it needed to be torn down.
We prayed that day and we just gave it to God, and we were just like, okay, God, we're doing this project. We don't know how, we just trust you.
Entonces fue así que ellos salieron ese día y oramos. Y dijeron, vamos a buscar el lugar donde vas a vivir.
I felt like God was just there in our presence and in that group, and knew that this was going to happen and that we just needed to have faith.
That was probably 11 o'clock in the morning. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had probably 20 people that said, I will help. And someone stand up and say to me, you worry about the construction and I'll worry about the money.
Y me dijeron que era imposible, como que las cosas se estaban poniendo imposibles, pero como que Dios abrió una puerta, y fue así cuando ya pensaron que todo no podía suceder.
Miracles just kept happening. First Methodist Bryan and the Rock Church from New Hampshire had just been looking to build a house for a hurricane victim, and they paid for and flew in a team of about 30 people to Houston to build the entire frame of the house. And then we needed property to build on, and a lot was made available, which turned out to actually be something one of our members had donated years earlier. So working with the churches, Neighbors in Action, Avenue CDC, and then the city of Houston, all of us coming together made it possible. And every time something came up, people came through.
Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was certainly a test of faith at every step. I was never given assurance that the concrete was going to show, that we were going to get it poured.
We prayed a lot about the rain to go away, or that the concrete, that the foundation would dry fast enough for them to start building. And it dried within like 24 hours, and they were able to get to work.
And that's where really First Methodist stepped up with not only having volunteers there every single week,
but everyone kind of came together with donations and volunteers, and every weekend coming to help with the house.
Cuando vi por primera vez que ya estaban trabajando y que Paula me mandó una foto donde me dijo que ya estaba la primera pared, sentí ganas de llorar y no hallaba qué hacer con Dios, y le decía, oh Dios, merezco todo esto que están haciendo por mí.
It feels like doing your purpose as Christians. We get the joy of helping. We get the joy of living out our purpose, that which we are designed to do.
Vi mucho amor en la iglesia, y realmente yo decía, wow, Dios, me diste una familia muy grande para que se preocuparan por mí, y entonces para mí eran como que fueran parte de mi vida.
There were our faithful volunteers that were there to make this such a beautiful ending for this family. It really is, it's such a beautiful thing to watch.
Wonderful to see the body of Christ come out and do with their hands and feet what they don't normally do. And it was wonderful to see everybody come together and get that done.
Absolutely. Watching the Harvey house take shape was a privilege. And on the other side of it, and especially after hearing from Alba multiple times, there is no doubt in my mind that Alba knows a little bit more about heaven because of what she has experienced on earth. Alba and her family and really everyone who worked on the project have been given a taste of a community that imitates Jesus. I have no doubt that the city of Houston, or at least one small corner of the city of Houston, looks more like what Jesus has in mind now. Life in the Commonwealth of Heaven does not include laziness. There is always more work to be done. There are always more ways to partner with God. There's always more kingdom building that needs to happen, that we have the privilege of undertaking. As citizens of heaven, we have the privilege of humility. This is the privilege of thinking of someone else before you think about yourself. This is the ability to look beyond your own noses and to pay attention to other people. This privilege of humility is closely tied to our privilege of work, because what we see will ultimately become what we do. It's the privilege of giving yourself away, of pouring yourself out, of living sacrificially, loving your neighbor well. This is the gift of imitating Jesus. If the traces of Jesus that are left behind on us are in the shape of a cross, then eventually our lives will become shaped like the cross. They will be sacrificial. They will be poured out. They will be cruciform. David and I were at a fundraising lunch a couple of weeks ago for a cause that we believe in and that we support. But I have to be honest, I was a little confused as to why we got the invitation to lunch. We had given to this project before, but we had given what fresh out of graduate school, 20-something-year-old pastors with a mortgage and a baby could give. So you get the picture. It wasn't a ton. But we went to lunch. I listened to the spiel of the woman that was fundraising, and I thought, yeah, we're going to give something. And then she said this. She said, I always believe in giving sacrificially to causes that I believe in deeply. Now, I have to admit, I've said that sentence from the pulpit, I'm pretty sure. But for some reason, this hit me differently that day. We had been invited to lunch not because we had the biggest giving capacity at the table, and believe me, we did not have the biggest giving capacity at the table, but because they knew we believed in the cause. We had been invited to lunch not because they thought we were going to fund the whole project, but because every little bit counted. We had been invited to lunch, I want to believe, because this fundraiser knew that the opportunity to give was going to make that imprint of Jesus on our lives stand out a little bit more. We are giving generously to that project. But I have to tell you that I also believe deeply in the missions that our church is doing. And so we are making a pledge here as well. I want to invite you to give, not because I believe that you have the biggest giving capacity in the church, and maybe that's you, and that's wonderful. But I want to invite you to give because every little bit counts. I want to invite you to give not because I believe that you're going to fund everything that we do, but because I hope that you believe in what we're doing in Houston through projects like Harvey House and in Cuba and in Burma and in Pakistan and in Peru and in places that I didn't even name. I want to give you the opportunity to give because I hope that in giving, that imprint of Jesus that is on your life will stand out a little bit more. Because undoubtedly, you giving will leave the imprint of Jesus on the life of someone else. And when that happens, the colony of heaven grows. The more people who look like Jesus, the more people who have the imprint of Christ on their lives, the more citizens of heaven there are. And the more citizens of heaven there are, the more earth begins to look heavenly. Work and humility create a need for hospitality. We have the privilege of welcoming others in. There are no closed doors or locked doors in the commonwealth of heaven. We are not meant to close ourselves in to ensure that we are uncontaminated. We are not meant to keep people out to make sure that they don't change our worship styles or our worship times. We are not meant to worry about letting other people in because it might disrupt our way of life. We have the privilege of practicing radical welcome, of saying that citizenship in heaven doesn't require studying for any kind of test or a long waiting period. We have no right to keep people out of the commonwealth of heaven, to hoard the gifts of the kingdom for ourselves, to be an exclusive club for insiders only. But we have every right. We have every right to fling wide the doors and say to the world that the church wants to welcome you in. We have every right to share the gifts that we have found in this place and in each other with other people. We have every right to include the outsider and the marginalized, to be kind to our neighbors, to love our city, and those who have forgotten that love was possible well. We have every right to pass out tastes of heaven like they're free samples. Our hospitality is the thing that invites others into citizenship. Our hospitality is the thing that gives weight to our work and our humility. Our hospitality leaves traces of Jesus, imprints of Jesus everywhere we go. Friends, the best way that I know to work, to be humble, to practice hospitality, to grow the kingdom of God and heaven on earth is to do it together. That's why we are asking you to turn in a pledge card. When you write your name on this pledge card and bring it to the front, it's your way of saying, I'm in. Let's do this together. So far, we have received 104 pledge cards, totaling $249,000. That is halfway to our goal of $500,000. I know that we are going to be able to fully fund our missions ministry this year, but we have to do it together. When we all do our part, whatever that part is, we leave traces of heaven and imprints of Jesus all around us. Let's pray.